tonight's episode, Night of the Living Dead. Here's your hosts, Casey and Matt.
Hello, welcome back. For those of you
So yeah, we had sorry for everybody over on YouTube. We had some technical difficulties because this is the first time we've ever done this. We're trying our best. Please be patient. Hopefully it's working now. We'll find out. Casey is doing some double checking. So I'll just go ahead and reintroduce the movie to see if hopefully it works this time. So we are watching Night of the Living Dead, the classic zombie film. If you've never seen it, this is kind of a weird way to watch it for the first time, but you know, you do you. But if you have seen it, hopefully we can add some layers of appreciation to it that you may not have had before. Because we're going to be talking about not just like the historical significance of the film, but also some of the behind the scenes details that we've learned from interviews and research we've done into the production. And of course, just the aesthetics of the film and why it's a quality film. Because I think ultimately, no matter how important or significant a film is, if you don't enjoy watching it, it's it's not going to be a classic like this one is.
I will say that,
Casey?
yeah, I think so. Why don't you check YouTube? I think we've got 8 viewers on Twitch. So
Okay.
I will say Matt has many more film degrees than me. I will provide the color commentary. I did have someone ask, how do you provide color commentary for black and white film? That's all beside the point. I'll come up with something. But hot takes, my department. Matt's got the well-researched background in history. But,
so also, before we begin, I should say, if you're watching us on Twitch or on YouTube, please do subscribe. It's the like button, share it with your friends, all of that stuff that we're supposed to say if we're good streamers. And we should have like a cool intro, and we didn't think of one, so let's just start the movie.
all right, here we go. Night of the Living Dead.
Let's just start the movie. There we go.
Many buttons.
Again, thank you guys for putting up with our technical difficulties. We're just learning how to do this as we go along. I think right off the bat, I think it's funny to note that we are doing public domain theater as a bit of a gag because, YouTube's intellectual property AI scans every single video to make sure you're not violating copyright. And one of the interesting things, one of the accidents of history of Night of the Living Dead is the fact that it wasn't a copyrighted film. It was very successful in theaters and the filmmakers did make their money back, so don't worry about that. But because of the lack of copyright, it was replayed on television in the early days of TV over and over again and became kind of famous that way. And then with the advent of video, VHS, and then later DVDs, anybody was able to copy the film and put it on video and put it in a rental store or sell it. And so it got spread more than I think a lot of low budget movies from this time. But when
original
you saw
viral
the intro page there, sorry?
I said original viral sensation.
It's a very early version of that. And that little title page that you saw before we started the movie, it said Night of the Living Dead, and there's a trademark on it. And some people might be confused. Trademark is intellectual property of a particular name and a style of fonts, like the logo itself. Whereas the copyright is for the whole film. The irony is they had a different title for the movie. I don't recall.
Night of the Flesh Eaters.
Night of the Flesh Eaters. And they changed the title at the last minute. But the law at the time was you had to have a copyright notice right under the title at the beginning of the movie, or sometimes you put it at the end. They forgot the copyright part. So when they changed the title to the title that we now see is trademarked, they didn't have a copyright on it.
Nice.
So that's why the movie is in the public domain and anybody can watch it. You can watch it on YouTube like we're doing right now. It's all perfectly legal because of somebody at the title printing store forgot to put the little C with the circle on it.
Nice.
And here we are.
Nice. No, and you might think they left money on the table because they couldn't sell the VHSs, but like you were saying, that's part of what made it go viral. They didn't use that term at the time, but everyone screening it, showing to their friends, and then it spawned not only sequels but spin-offs. They were able to branch the Romero universe, where John Russo, the other co-creator, co-writer, along with George Romero, had different views that they wanted to take the zombies they had created, and They were both able to make Return of the Living Dead spun off from this, and a lot of different properties.
Yeah, they made George Romero made a career of the Dead movies, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, whereas his partner did the Living Dead movies, which are all radically different. But we get to see both visions because of this weird accident. Um, I always find it odd that this character. We should actually talk about the movie itself. I always find it odd that they make a point of him not having gloves now, but he puts on gloves later. Aren't they driving gloves? Like, why is he putting them on
I
after
mean,
having driven?
it's very clear why they put them on. You look for it as an Easter egg later on in the film if you spot anyone with gloves. Spoilers, but no, I think again,
Well, no,
could see that as a
so yes,
reshoot.
it is on a production level. They do, of course, want to remind you when he shows up later, but on a within the universe, why is this guy not have his gloves on when he's driving? Just seems silly to me.
Good question. Continuity errors abound. I don't think that's what people were looking at for the film. Actually,
No.
this is in black and white. I mentioned the color commentary, but it's not like it's just so old they didn't have color film. Clearly, for horror, even Rosemary's Baby came out the same year, so there was an explosion of modern filmmaking and horror. But this one's black and white simply for budget reasons, I believe. Of John Romero had made commercials and done kind of business and industrials. He actually also shot segments for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And so this was his first feature film using all their film equipment and things, but black and white film was just cheaper. And their, what was it, $6,000 budget would have gone a lot further with black and white.
Yeah, it's an issue that modern filmmakers don't really have to worry about. Most people have a high definition camera in their pocket, and most digital editing software is free, and all of that stuff. Whereas back then, not only did you have to have the equipment, you had to buy the film, you had to develop the film, and then you had to have the equipment for editing. And editing at that time involved literally cutting film with a blade, and it was all a very slow and complicated process. And back then, even if you could get your friends together in the gang to like work on a small independent film, it was still not going to be cheap because of the expense of film. Nowadays, the most expensive thing is still definitely the people. If you want to get 20 crew members and a half dozen actors and get a location and have everybody show up at the same time, that's going to cost you money, even if you're not paying for the camera and you don't have to pay for film or development or editing or anything like that. So it's a very budgets back then with budgets now it's an apples and oranges thing simply because of the access to the kinds of equipment that were needed. An extra thing is when you say that they were commercial filmmakers, that was actually a valuable thing for them because they didn't have to buy or rent the cameras. They already own the lights.
I will say,
and all of that stuff.
agreed, and I will pause at this moment for the memed part of this movie with their coming to get you, Barbara. Shout out to the chat for calling it out, and welcome Pennsylvania native Dave Hinkle.
Yeah, I actually like this character. The guy is kind of a jerk to his sister, but as soon as they have no idea, like we know because we've seen this movie is older than probably everybody in our audience and us. We know what's going to happen, but he doesn't know. There's just a guy attacking his sister, and he shifts gears from being a jerk, like a big brother jerk, to protecting his little sister. And he's only in this movie for whatever, I think whatever we had, 7 minutes. And then he appears briefly at the very end of the film. But like it's a memorable character. And you remember that line. And it's because of little sort of character details like that I think is a big part of why this movie is memorable. Other kind of horror movies, a lot of times the characters are very thin. You don't like them because they're all kind of jerks or whatever.
Well, I will ask, is this the first instance of the lady losing her shoe running from the monster? We're establishing tropes.
in the commentary track, she claims she actually tripped and lost her shoe, and they liked it, and so they shot an insert of her losing the other shoe. But the fall was real, she claims. I mean, like I said, it's a little tropey. I don't know if that's actually.
Well, again, seeing something this old, like it invented, again, everything we think of Michael Myers and everyone tripping, running away from Jason. Watching this film, you see a lot of it. I will say also the zombie. They don't use that word in this movie, by the way. So ghouls.
Yeah.
He's showing a lot of higher brain function. He can't get in the car. I remember the first time I watched it thinking, oh, she's locking the door, but zombies can't operate a door handle like that. He tries the handle, then he thinks, wait, I'm going to bash it with a rock. Which again, our modern interpretation of zombies that this spawned has still evolved to more of a mindless horde. I realized people could explain maybe he's more freshly dead, and Day of the Dead definitely dives into, hey, what higher brain functions, can they be taught things? Can they be cured? But this was establishing a lot of those early on things that we do see as tropes now.
Another funny accident of production. This car is, I think it was George Romero's mom. It was one of the producer's mom's car, and they were filming for one day, and then they took a break for the weekend, and she got into a car accident, and they had to account for it, and that's why.
Oh wow! I thought you were going to say they trashed it and brought it back to her, and she's like, "What'd you do?" But quite the reverse.
The cut there is, and they admit this, it's technically incorrect because they're on one side of the movement, and then they cut to the other side of the line, and you don't actually see the impact, you just hear the sound, and it's just the car is just sort of there against the tree. It works, like they did a great job by
movie magic
those things. But they set up the gas pump, which you totally don't even realize the first time that happens. But it's there's these little things that they set up all along throughout the movie, and it's they do a great job of layering these things so that when they bring up the gas later, it's not a complete surprise.
Right. And again, I think a Pennsylvania farmhouse, sure, maybe they have a gas pump, so it doesn't even stick out as an obvious point. But I will say, yeah, again, so far, chase scene much more active than classic horror movies, or, again, Frankenstein and those were not in the same 2 decades as this, but I do think that horror had been evolving. This is the modernist era. Cameras were lighter, cheaper. They had better quality film, so you could shoot on location without huge setups and sound stages and things. So this movie's definitely benefiting for that, and that's one of the reasons I think that horror and modern explosion is seeing a lot better in the dark with film grains. So we're seeing the chase sequence there.
On the commentary, they do complain about the lights in this sequence because it was a hassle to light it this way, which is true. But I think one interesting thing about the fact in the 90s there was a big explosion of commercial directors and music video directors becoming film directors, like Michael Bay and David Fincher and Mick G and a bunch of those kinds of guys. But it wasn't very common here at this time. And I think one way that these guys stand out from other independent films in the late 60s and early 70s was they spent a lot of time making very short form product, the advertisements for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So every shot had to be interesting and impactful. And they took that and they did it for 90 minutes. So all of these, the chiaroscuro lighting and the canted angles and stuff, it all is, they spend a lot of time making these shots look good.
A zombie wandering through the phone line, unintentionally pulling it down. Again, that's a bit of an obvious plant. I felt that once ham-handed. Just in time.
Yeah. They do, but it looks good in a way that I think, and like you were saying, the way that more fine-grained black and white was allowed, and actually also that's another advantage of black and white over color at the time, is that you could have a higher ISO without it being obvious and expensive. But you can appreciate little angles like that where she's sort of tucked in the corner. There's only like the bright strip down the middle. Those sorts of things don't occur to somebody who hasn't been shooting pretty commercials
Yep.
for a long time.
Oh, there's more of them. I will say again, this movie also brought about kind of what the modern interpretation of zombie that we think of are. This established, again, spoilers for later, that the infection comes through the bite. That again, that's how it spreads. If you get bit, you will turn. Before that, classic zombie movies, which there were, it was White Zombie or I Walked with a Zombie. They were more of a voodoo master is using a spell or potion to control an undead person for like a specific aim. They are sending them out into the night to bring them someone, their henchmen. But this turned it. We started to see there's not just one. There's multiple coming out of the woods, and they're a mindless horde. They don't have a goal. They don't have a puppet master. They are just a threat due to their size and not being able to reason with them. But we did just also just get our next character, Ben, showing up.
Yeah, and it's I think part of their inexperience as filmmakers, not knowing what the rules are. They've introduced their main character 15 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
He's the one who has all of the character arc and all of the best dialogue and stuff for the vast majority of the movie. And it's weird that we start with this other character entirely, who turns out to be kind of a minor character.
Yeah.
But they didn't know, and so instead we get to appreciate this like very creative, unusual story structure, which I like quite a bit. You don't necessarily have to show the main character at the beginning and that kind of stuff.
Right. It goes against 3-act structure, which modern filmmaking and studios would say you have to. Why we can't get to. If they got this script now, they would have red line notes of you need to introduce the character earlier with the hook. And this again didn't know those formats that we hadn't locked them in, and so that's one of the reasons it feels so fresh to this day.
One counter example to that, and it always blows my mind that they miss it, is Star Wars. Like one of the most successful, if not the most successful movie of all time. Luke doesn't show up for like 25 minutes in that movie. But like they're always, instead you've got these development executives who all read Sid Field and they're like, you have to introduce the main character in the first 5 minutes, otherwise we don't know what's going on.
Start the hero's journey.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know that the hero's journey applies to the. Obviously, that's for Star Wars, but I don't think it applies to this. Like, I don't know that Ben is bringing back the chalice or any of that sort of nonsense.
Trying to keep home safe. I will again get into some of my thoughts on how what this could apply to for modern views, but I will point out it was progressive at the time. 1968, casting the main character as an African American was not something that, again, large studio movies would do outside of very specific roles. But just having, and again, George Romero was not trying to be progressive. He didn't write Ben as an African American character. He had said the actor Dwayne, I forget his last name, just was the best one that auditioned. And he showed up and they picked the best performer. But again, for the time, that was progressive to be that colorblind in casting and say, okay, I didn't write it that way, but let's go with him.
An interesting thing I just discovered while I was looking at some interviews is they had cast the guy as the lead. It was one of their like acting friends, but they still sort of had open auditions. And when this guy came in, when Dwayne came in, they were like, he's so much better. And even the actor himself was like, no, you got to give it. He's a better actor than him. You got to give him the lead. So like it was. I mean, I think the colorblindness is a progressive statement in itself to say we don't care. We're going to give it to the best actor.
Yeah,
that's a very like that's I think an ideal that a lot of people strive for.
Yep, and I will say it does add an extra element of racial tension. I'll say, especially for 1968, the civil rights movement was at its peak. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And we just had a scene where she's being hysterical and he's throwing her in a chair and shaking her, which again was part of the movie language at the time. A woman would go hysterical in a moment, but having a African American man be the one that smacks some sense into her definitely reads differently than having a white actor or character do it. And so again, even if George Romero wasn't intentionally putting race into the film when he wrote it, I think the casting definitely added that, and that's something that audiences would have resonated with, or one of the reasons that it's persisted this long and had, again, an additional layer of tension is because of those choices, even if it was just based on performance and quality of the actor.
Yeah, I mean it's racially progressive, but sexually regressive. So you gotta
You got to both balance it out.
in the balance.
I will again,
So
yeah, just for
I do feel like her performance as because we're experiencing it with her when her brother is killed defending her and she's fleeing this guy that she does not understand, and then there's all of these people who are trying to attack them. Her traumatic reaction, I think, is actually a very good performance. I think there's a lot of realism to that, and it does take you out. I think now the man slapping her to quiet her down, because like that's just not. I don't think it would even occur to a character nowadays to do that, let alone like put it into a movie.
right.
It's just sort of like, why is that your solution?
Again,
But as an
misogyny, but
actress, I think she's doing a great job.
no, agreed that I think for the role, and again, it's not on her, it's on society at the time for allowing
Yeah.
that to be a trope of the 50s or 20s through 50s that women get hysterical. You have to slap sense into them, calm them down.
Apparently, the guy who played Ben was uncomfortable with uh, hitting her because he actually did not think the trope was valid at the
Yeah,
time, but she also needed to be unconscious for the next like section of the film. So it
well,
was like, that's the plot.
yeah, no, that so far he's just shaking her. I will say that, but coming up, it gets more rough. I will say also these zombies seem to be pretty flammable. He threw one outside with a single match, touches it, and it goes up, and I'm just like, oh, okay. Didn't there's no dousing of anything on it, but definitely comes up
Yeah,
later.
zombies are flammable. Is that not? That's just realism. I
I'm
think.
gonna go ahead and say you could argue, get in the weeds of there's a recent undead. She was at a cemetery, so that recent undead are coming back, probably formaldehyde injected in their veins to prevent them from rotting for the viewings. Those, sure, that's flammable. One line, and it would, in the third movie, could probably
You needed that.
retroactively
You needed
explain.
that to make you feel like you were in the movie.
Exactly. But
The funny thing about this kitchen, so this house was a rundown old house, and they had to decorate it. This was another advantage of having experience with commercial filmmaking. Their art department, which is like again like a gang of friends, but they put a lot of detail into this house, so it doesn't. It's not sort of a vague, empty house. You see this a lot nowadays when somebody's filming in, especially in like a student film, somebody's filming in their apartment and it's just sort of bare white walls. There's a lot of detail to this house that's never like addressed or significant, like the heads in the living room, the animal trophies in the living room. They spent a lot of time making sure that the house was filled with stuff. But an interesting thing about this kitchen is that at the time they arrived, they were going to be filming in the living room first. So somebody, our director, or whatever, was like, let's go, set up in there. And the producer said, no, we need to clean up the kitchen first so that people have a place to sit down and eat. Because we're going to be in this house for the next
for the crew,
like 6 weeks
not in
or
the
whatever
film.
it is, when we need to be comfortable. And I think that's a thing that people forget if you're not working on the film, if you're just watching it and appreciating it, which we are, it's a great movie, but they're still human beings who have to eat and
Yeah,
sleep and get through their day. And there's not office politics, but internal set politics of like who likes who and cliques and all of that stuff. Everything that you've ever experienced on your job at the office or in the warehouse or whatever it is that you work, all of that happens on a film set. And but the difference is that it's not the same place every day, and they have to make that comfortable for everybody. And I think it was wise on the producer's part. And that's not a thing that gets brought up. Here's another one of those cool shots that isn't
Highlights the
strictly
pops.
necessary, but a commercial director is
Yeah.
like, hey, that's a neat thing. Let's do that.
Let's feature it. Well, I will say it's also affects the movie. So a decision the producer made said, no, let's start in the kitchen, and again make that first. Ended up in the film. Again. Oh, I think I saw a light stain.
Oh, sorry. It didn't affect the shooting. It was
Okay.
just they cleaned up the kitchen first. They
Yeah.
didn't rearrange the scenes.
Yeah.
Logically, so the production schedule dictated they were filming in the living room first, and they did do that. But he said, clean up the kitchen first so there's a space
Gotcha.
to be comfortable, and then we'll dress the
Well,
living room for
I'll even say
the
that
purposes of shooting.
your example of, hey, think of all the people and the stress in your office and your office politics. Take that with, like I said, not eating and working sometimes 12 or 16-hour days, and it definitely heightens it.
Yeah.
I was going to say this moment again. I realized the casting. There was a moment at the start of the scene where the boarding step where she has the knife and is just staying in the corner. She's clearly in shock, but there were parts with her staying away from him with the knife that I, on first watching and even rewatching, I'm like, that adds again a bit of racial tension of, does she feel she can trust this man? With him cast as an African American, 1968 reads differently. With her standing on the other side of the room holding a knife, feeling unsafe, versus just the shock and horror of the zombie side. But we see her warming up now and starting to help.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, he is just the most practical man in the world, and he does not register any of that because there's zombies outside.
He's straight to action. And again,
I love that about his character.
I will say, yeah, and I know you and I have discussed, or you had a video on Auteur Theory versus reception theory, and what I will also say that as a film theorist, years later, I could read into, hey, as a black man in America, 1968, the idea of him being used to horrors or threats on a daily situation and how to adapt to them, I could see him as an African American adapting better and being like straight to action protection, and having perhaps seen or gone through instances where he was under threat in a given day and the situation turns. But I know, again, the character was not written as an African American.
I think it's worth noting, though, that as that film is a process, that the script is not the movie and that the production is not the movie. But I do think that they were aware of a lot of these things that you're talking about, because it would be impossible not to. But even the actor Dwayne, Dwayne Jones himself, he recognized some of the things that were that the way the audience would react to it being him rather than the original guy that they cast, and he put that into the film. And I think the director and the filmmakers were aware of all of those things during the shoot. So it wasn't part of their original conception of the film, but I think those racial tensions are part of their finished production of the film. There's no way for them to have not been aware of it on set. Apparently, also, the guy, Wayne Jones, was not an unfriendly guy, but sort of not personable. And so he was often separate and off to the side from the rest of the cast and crew. Not in an aloof way, but like, I guess he was apparently just like reading books all the time. He wasn't his job, and it was just that kind of guy. But he did have a sense of being sort of separate from the rest of the cast because of that. And that probably contributed to a lot of the things that you were talking about.
I would say, yeah, that's almost method acting of in the film, they do start divvying up lines. And I will say this scene, this turn right here, is that he's now describing what he was doing when the zombies first appeared. So he has been go-to action, no emotions, let's just get it done, shaking her. And this is the first time he's starting to break down and show that he's also overwhelmed. Like inside, he's been moving, but he's now starting to explain the first time he saw one of the bodies or them eating them.
Yeah, he was a stage actor, and actually after this became a professor, an acting teacher in New York. And I think this scene, more than anything, being able to sustain a long speech without a bunch of cuts and without flashing back to what he's talking about is really difficult. That's a big demand on the actor.
No, and I know you
David
did
Bordwell,
a series, a video called, the problem with show don't tell, and I will say
Yes.
this is an example of he's just telling. They, because of budget, they're not cutting to flashbacks, or they didn't do the gas tanker exploding, but his performance here is carrying the telling instead of showing.
yeah, you get the story information and you sort of you feel it, but you also see how he feels reflecting on those events, which would be different than if he says, "Man, the first time I saw them and they did and cut to the truck exploding." That's a whole different experience, and it all hinges on him being a good actor. And he actually contributed to the dialogue. By the way, he rewrote a bunch of the
Nice.
stuff. The reason it's a tanker truck is because the character was originally a truck driver. And as good as Dwayne Jones was, it kind of didn't quite fit like his look and his vibe. So they made him more, they were a little bit vague, but he was sort of more of a white collar kind of guy. But
I will say,
the reason there was a truck is because he was initially a truck driver.
yeah, I will say she's now going through her, Johnny and things. Her performance mirrored his, not quite as good and a little more 50s, level of acceptable versus what would be modern for 68.
Yeah, and I think, and part of what's doubly problematic with it is we saw it at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
So,
Just retelling.
like,
The problem
yeah,
with
so,
show
like,
don't tell
he's
is
telling
don't
us something
show and then
we
tell.
haven't seen.
You're right.
She's retelling something which was filmed in an amazing, we all remember the cemetery scene. So it's kind of it's sort of bad on both levels, which is really unfortunate in this.
I will say, I know people love Martin Scorsese, and I like a lot of his films, but Gangs of New York shows in the first 5 minutes the scene with Leonardo DiCaprio as a kid learning to wipe the blood off a blade from a razor from his father, Liam Neeson. Then he steps out of prison 15 years later, and we literally have a flashback of him hearing that scene and showing the shot again within 5 minutes. And it's show, tell, then show again. And it's the worst offender. But here comes our classic hysteria. He's now back to action. He's collecting set. I gave myself a minute and a half for emotions. Now we're done. She's pinned. She's spiraling though.
Yeah, that in particular, the grabbing of her shirt is such a like the 1950s style. It is. It wouldn't feel like overacting if there was more people acting this way, but when she's against this like method actor kind of guy, this acting styles kind of contrast, which isn't which is a little, I think, a bit of a flaw. And I think it's okay to admit this movie's a classic. It's not perfect, and that's true of I think most movies. Even the very best movies, there's still things in them that are like I don't really like that as much. And I think people are often afraid to say there's a flaw in this movie that we all consider great. There's some flaws in this movie, and that's fine.
Yes. No, I'll say that again. This also starts to bring up something that we see as a trope in later zombie movies: is the securing the location and then the character that is working against and hysterical, and you can humor, but then once they start to become a threat of going outside, and we talked about him slapping her, but that was a closed fist strike. And then the unconscious, which again, like I said, having African American do that reads much different than the traditional, Burt Lancaster or someone, like Clark Gable slapping someone around to knock some sense into them.
Yeah.
And then unbuttoning the coat again.
Yeah, the unbuttoning the coat always reads as weird. It always takes me a second to realize, oh, he's sort of checking. He's doing like.
I would say she was hot, and so he's like maybe the cool air will help her wake up. But again, it does add an extra element of tension of like, where is he going? He's stopping right at the coat.
Yeah. I'm also another flaw in this movie that I have a hard time getting over is they've been in this house for like 20 minutes at this point, and probably longer. Like it's 20 minutes of screen time, and the people in the basement still haven't.
Hey, spoilers! Spoilers!
Spoilers.
I feel like it's another 20 minutes too.
To me. it bothers me so much because
Oh,
it's so unreasonable.
I'm going to point out the radio because it's now talking about the mass hysteria and groups of assassins. The wording is odd and vague from a modern understanding of zombies. Of they don't use the word outbreak. They don't, they call it a mass hysteria. And so it's interesting to look back and go, oh, they wouldn't, saying outbreak does point to a contagion or virus or something that modern day we go, well, that's where zombieism comes from. But at this time it was not. And so they're just saying monsters, ghouls, mass hysteria, assassins. So it's interesting to hear before the tropes and everything was established for the modern zombie film, what was being used even to describe the situation that's going on by the radio and the characters.
Even the disease thing, that didn't really happen until 28 days later, right?
I think
Like
so.
up until that point, it was always dead people.
Yes, and this one I'm not going to spoil what's the cause for this because it comes in another 40 minutes or something like that. But again, I think I did allude to this was the first one that said that a bite can transfer it. So even saying, oh well, that's clearly a virus or contagion, but they have a different read on it that I always forget until I watch this again, and we'll get to later. So everyone, stay tuned.
Oh no, in this one, the bite doesn't transfer it. The girl, I don't care about that. You don't watch this. That's what the girl is bitten, and that's why she's injured. But they say on the radio, it's simply being dead. The dead come to life, and if you die, you will come to life fairly quickly. Is what their claim is. It doesn't matter if you were bitten by a zombie or not when you die.
Gotcha.
That's at least that's my understanding of it.
No, that makes sense for again all the where we eventually get the cause of. I'm just again spoilers for 10 minutes from now of referring to the in the basement, the daughter, like I said, but agreed that it is she is injured, so she could be dying of other things and then turning.
Yeah. Some of this stuff, some of these shots that they're doing, I'm sort of impressed with how many different angles they managed to get. Because at one point in the director's commentary, Romero claims that they had a 6-to-1 shooting ratio, which means for every 6 feet of film that they exposed, they used 1 foot of actually ends up in the movie, which is very, very tight.
Yeah.
A normal movie at the time, I think, would be something like 12 or 15-to-1. Nowadays, because it's not film, it's pixels.
Digital,
People shoot like 20-to-1 or 100-to-1 and crazy stuff like that. 6-to-1 is almost unheard of. And they were very not just efficient, but like they had to have a clear idea of which shots they were going to use.
Intentional and conscientious.
Yeah, and it's a cost-saving measure, but it also meant, hey, we're spending time on this particular shot. We're going to make it look good. We're going to make it an interesting shot rather than just sort of point the camera at the actors and let them talk. And it was, I think, to their advantage that they were that careful with it. And I talk to old crew members all the time who lived through the transition. You and I were in film school when it was happening,
right?
But I know people that they shot on film. And then everything sort of over the course of 5 or maybe 10 years in the late 90s and early 2000s, everything became digital with few exceptions. They feel like there's a different vibe on set in terms of every shot being precious and every take being precious, that you're not going to waste film
doing 100 takes.
Hoping.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, you'll have directors say, hey, we're rehearsing, but let's just roll on rehearsal and see what comes. Or they'll be halfway through the take and somebody screws up and the director says, just keep rolling, reset to 1.
Right.
And they
we'll
just
fix it in post.
Takes that go on for 15 minutes, even though it's a 2-minute, actual shot. And it drives the editors nuts.
Oh, yeah. My wife's an assistant editor and doing dailies for modern day or anything that is, again, running a production like that, especially multiple IMAX cameras or something. I think Jordan Peele is famous for just let's keep rolling. And yeah, it creates a lot of work for people in post with people on set thinking we can fix it in post or just find the best one. But
that's not even a fix it in post problem. It's just like it's an organizational thought process that has to be done at some point. And it's nice if you do it on set. If you don't do it on set, you're just pushing your work as usually the camera assistant and the script supervisor. You're pushing your work on the
To post.
editor's assistant and the editor, a month from now. And you're just making more work for them, which is, again, comparing it to any sort of office job, like I'm sure that happens in every office where
Right.
somebody
Somebody else's
fucks up
department
and
problem.
it's now your job to take care of it.
Yeah. I will say also interesting to see there's an unboarded window right behind him while he's saying this place is boarded up pretty solid, by the way. I don't believe in his craftsmanship. Several of those are very flimsy sticks, but
So there's an sorry, let me cut you off there. There's an explanation for that, and this is a mistake that a lot of filmmakers make who aren't as experienced. The reason why there's no board on that window is because the house is actually on the edge of a big hill, and there's a drop off right behind there where nobody could possibly reach. And to the filmmakers in their heads, they have a mental model, as you do it when you spend a bunch of time in one location. You start to know in your head, oh, I know what's outside that window, even without walking out and looking at it. You know that there's a tree out there and there's a hill and whatever. And you can make the mistake of thinking the audience has that
right,
same mental
you
map.
didn't
And
establish
so
it in the film, though.
that as he's saying, I boarded everything up and everything's safe, there's an open window behind him. He's correct, but we, the audience, don't know it.
Right.
And
If
again,
it didn't make it in the
film,
film, right. If they didn't make it in the film, it's an error. Like you have to establish that, oh yeah, that one's inaccessible.
And it comes from, they've made 30-second, 60-second things that they don't have to maintain the reality of the fiction of their narrative commercial for longer than that. Here they have to sustain it for an hour and a half, and they just missed it. And you'll see this in movies all the time, but in particular you'll see it in sort of first time films.
Yeah.
And you'll also see filmmakers make the opposite mistake where they're starting out, where the reality of the scene is there's something here or there's something blocking the way, and therefore the audience knows that. And in fact, they don't. You can cheat it. You can have somebody, just walk that direction. And they're, in reality, on set, they're walking into a wall. But to the camera, they're walking off camera and they can go anywhere. And it's hard to wrap your mind around filmic space compared to the real space. And it's something that takes a lot of practice. And so even somebody like George Romero, who had a lot of commercial experience, and he is a great visual filmmaker, makes a little mistakes like that. And it's, I think, probably the only one.
Right. And again,
that it
if
can
we weren't
happen to anybody, and that's something to be aware of.
if we weren't examining it shot by shot, then it would fly right by. But I will say,
I think in that case you're right, because he says the room is safe and there's no window in the shot as he's saying that line.
Well,
that particular one I think is kind of egregious.
And it becomes a plot point pretty quickly here, where the question is, how safe are we in here?
Right.
But I will also say I always feel technology in older films, especially horror and things, can have a lot of technology with the radio, the rotary phone, where a lot of the times nowadays it's like, oh man, if they just had a cell phone, they'd be like, oh, there's some kind of outbreak. It's trending on the Twitter. But obviously in modern horror films, they all just go, oh, there's no reception or there's no service and signal. So we have ways of solving it, but it's always quaint to see in the past and just think, they didn't have the internet.
I saw on one of those subreddits where they point out movie flaws or whatever, where it might have been Friends, but I think there was an episode of Friends where there was a blackout, but they still picked up their landline phone and called each other. And they were like, this is a gaping plot hole. Like, how could you possibly call somebody on a landline when the power's out? And it's because it was some, Gen Z person who had never had a landline and didn't know that they still work without power. And so there's always little things like that. The older the movie is, the more you're going to run into things where you're like, oh, I guess that's how reality was.
Yeah.
Back then.
When Double Indemnity has a whole bunch of recording on wax cylinders that Fred McMurray's doing, I'm like, oh man, wow, this is even before records. But here's the part you were talking about. People were hiding in the basement all this time, coming up, and then finally he confronts them. As soon as they're out, he's saying, why didn't you come and help? You heard a woman scream. They're like, we didn't know. We wanted to keep ourselves safe. And
Yeah,
again,
I just don't buy it. It's just too long. And like there was the screaming and the fighting, and then there was hammering nails, and then it gets quiet again. Like the reason that it's really clear, the reason they come out at this moment is because the plot has slowed down and allowed them to enter the scene.
no, I mean, I think any reasonable person would be like, oh, maybe we could go out and help. Then B, this character, the older man, I feel like it's not the young guy's Tom. The older man is Mr. Cooper or Harry. He keeps saying, even from the jump, oh no, it's safer. I have to look out for me and my family, not worry about others. So he's been down there the whole time arguing, no, I don't care if there's anyone up there. We're not risking ourselves for someone else.
That's my point.
Uh,
Only there's not going to be
Yeah,
five.
I mean, they justify it. I just don't buy it.
that even an unreasonable character like him would let the young white guy go out and say, "You go peek now." But
It's mostly that it's why is this the time that they came up?
oh, okay,
That it's the timing of it. Like why didn't they check before? Because there's not even a time cut in the sequence of him, hammering nails and stuff.
right.
It's just it seems very. I can just see the seams in the script. That's all that it is. That's
I
why
mean,
it's
yeah,
gonna take so long.
I am fine with. They heard a lull finally, and they're like, maybe if it were zombies or they killed someone, they've wandered out now and it's quiet. Let's check. But I think again, this is the part where we start to see some of the dynamic with the older guy saying, "We have to get back in the cellar. We should take again everything down." And it's kind of like the Alamo, but Ben is saying, "No, I've secured it up here." I again have questions about how well he's secured some of the windows, but they're drawing lines, saying you're either with us or against us.
No, I'm not going to wait. I've made my decision. Now you make yours.
And I think
Now wait a minute.
the one unfortunate thing about this whole argument is Dwayne Jones is just a better actor than all three of them.
Yeah.
And the guy who plays Harry Cooper, Carl Hardman, he's sort of in that in between stage. Like he's not quite as sort of 50s as the girl, but he's not quite as sort of modern as Dwayne Jones was. And then the young guy, he's actually a singer. He's a musician of some kind. He was sort of like a low level, like trying to be pop star, and it never really happened for him. But like he's not crazy in acting.
No.
And so the whole dynamic between sort of the three of them would work a lot better if two of the three were better actors.
Yeah. Well, I will also say again, I'm with Ben in this argument, except for again, within 30 seconds of him saying that I've got this place locked up tight, he walks by a window and is grabbed by several zombies. So his confidence is great. I believe him 80%, but also maybe you could do better. And it keeps getting pointed out. And I will say again, part of this dynamic with Mr. Cooper and Ben arguing over who's right, again, calls to mind the racial tension that came about with the casting. So him.
Yeah, it's hard to. Harry, Mr. Cooper is one of those. It's hard to find the line. Is he being racist and not trusting Ben because he's black, or is he just a jerk who doesn't listen to other people who
Anyone.
have different ideas? And I think you can see it both ways. And like honestly, maybe the character is kind of a little bit of both. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that he would have agreed if it was a white guy to stay upstairs. Like, I don't think he would have.
Right.
But I also think the argument would have been maybe a little less virulent if it hadn't been a white guy.
Right.
It would be interesting to see if they had cast a white guy, and I don't know, like, we know that Dwayne Jones rewrote some of his dialogue. We don't know if any of this dialogue was rewritten.
Yeah.
So we don't know how the scene would be different if a white guy played better. And it's one of those, like, what if things. We
Yeah.
don't, would Carl Hardman have played it differently, or would he have played it exactly the same? And who knows?
I will say we established a few other zombie tropes. He was shooting out the window, shot one of them through the chest twice. It didn't react, and then he finally shot them in the head. So it was a learning moment, and again, establishing the rules of the genre. And again, this part is drawing the lines. He's trying to take the Barbara with him, and Ben is like, no, she's staying up here. There's a dividing up the radio, food. It's one thing to say, all right, you go in the cellar and be on your own. But once you start arguing over resources, that's where, again, societal breakdowns happen. And again, they can go along race lines. Or George Romero did say when he was writing it, he didn't have Ben as African American. He was just writing about the breakdown of societal units, including older and younger. So Harry and Ben and even Tom, the young guy here, is division around young people and old people, or the older generation, and whether they listen to young people or not. But that's what we're seeing, those division lines. And again, the casting did add race in. But I think how society and units break down in stress is part of it, and that's applicable to race, even if it wasn't the intention during writing. But like you said, it was a film is not a writing property. It's made on set, it's edited. I'd say we've talked about even the marketing and exhibition of a movie can change the interpretation. But I will say that, yeah, Tom also has a bit, hey man, daddy-o, we could fix this up real good. And his girlfriend with the cuffed jean jacket also reads like, rockabilly is what we'd call it now, but I don't know at the time. Cool cats.
Yeah, I don't know how cool he is. I sort of wonder, is this what somebody in rural Pennsylvania thought was cool, and they wasn't actually that cool?
I mean, again, I'll also say, injecting the racial element into it, saying, hey, the young people who are cool hanging out with black people and stuff and talking the daddy-o style or adopting a lot of pop culture elements would have been, at least on the surface, better staying, with versus older greatest generation elements, rejecting it. And you did ask, oh, would it have been different? Is he just an asshole who doesn't listen to others? We do now meet his wife, and it does not seem like he listens to her, and she's clearly tired of the shit, even before this zombie apocalypse happened.
Yeah, no, and this is an interesting drama too, because it is a little bit like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf kind of drama happening in the middle of zombie stuff. Like they don't like each other and they have a crappy marriage, but they're sticking together for the kids. And it's like, wow, that's a weird sort of circumstance to be in. And it's also a weird thing to introduce halfway into the movie. And I kind of love that they do, because again, normally you'd be told you can't just introduce this family drama halfway through the movie. You have to let us know, what this movie is, in the first 10 minutes. And we have to show them arrive at the house and all that stuff. And we don't. And it means all of this stuff comes out of nowhere, which is, I feel like what the experience would be like if there was an apocalyptic, zombie, rising from the dead. We wouldn't know what to do, and we would be in the middle of our own interpersonal dramas and wouldn't necessarily be able to set those aside during the quiet moments. And I feel like a lot of these things are very true observations of human nature.
Yeah.
I think that's
No,
again part of the reason why this movie is well remembered.
yes, and because it's applicable to certain things like racial divides, even if it wasn't, written by, and it's not 100% of it. It's the dynamic reads as true, and we can apply it to. Oh yes, you could break down along generational lines, or family lines, or racial lines.
And some fun production stuff about this, by the way. The house has no basement. This is the basement of, I think they said it was like their office somehow. And this is the wise use of cinematic space, where they have this door and they step through the door, and you cut to the other side, where they filmed it, 2 weeks later in an entirely different location, that he walks through the door on the other side, and walks into the basement, and the basement is 12, 15 miles away. But us, the audience, never know, as long as the actor, and this is one of the difficulties of film acting that goes underappreciated. That guy has to keep himself in the same mental space, not keep himself, but he has to return to that same mental space. How angry was I when I opened the door and stormed out on bed? Like what? And also the continuity of, did I use my right hand? Did I step in with my left foot first? You have to keep all of that in your head 2 weeks later or whatever when they filmed it. I don't know exactly the schedule, but carrying that over to a different place in a different time and making it seem to the audience like it's a continuous motion, like it could have been a camera upstairs and a camera downstairs and filmed simultaneously. That's an acting skill that not everybody has.
Yep.
And it's different than stage for that reason, and for many reasons. But that's one of the reasons it's different than stage acting, where it's continuous because it's continuous.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about continuity on stage because you are just living in the moment, and the
It's
characters
not
live.
2 weeks later and remembering your
Yeah.
state. I will say also, I think they come back to the radio, but the generational divide and again, the politics and race, I will say the lack of actual politics erupting into it now is that when the mass hysteria, the initial radio broadcast was saying, murderous mobs, we didn't hear the word communist come up, which again, I was like, oh, if they're not going for virus outbreak or something, you would think in 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War, I think the Tet Offensive was that year, they didn't go, hey, is it communist sleeper agents like the Red Scare, and those things were very prevalent, and the absence of it in a potential explanation. And again, I was calling the older guy greatest generation, but more like the Korean War, But these young people, it's like, why weren't they drafted? But again, when we get to more of the radio, the longer they go without even suggesting like that versus mass hysteria of assassins, mobs of assassins, I'm like, from what country? The absence of it feels intentional, that politics has not come up yet.
In a sense, I think that might make it feel a little more timeless. I mean, it's obviously the film is of its time because of the hairstyles, clothing, and stuff, but and the punch of women. But by not bringing up specific politics, it does sort of feel like, oh, I can apply this
Yeah.
now. And these films have been, not just this one, but Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, the original trilogy, have been remade and applied to current events, and again, without specifically stating in so many words. And I think sometimes that maybe that's an intelligent choice if you want. I mean, you may want to make a movie that is about the current day, but oftentimes that's a mistake because the filmmaking process takes so long that whatever statement you're making, it's too late to matter. You've brought up the Wonder Woman 1984 example, for example, where they tried to make a commentary on Trump, but because of the release schedule being altered by COVID, the movie came out 2 months after the election. So, like, now what?
Yes, even for whatever politics you have, having a, hey, very specific to a time and place instantly makes it dated. And I will say technology moves fast enough now that if you had a movie where people, I said, oh, with cell phones, and they're tweeting, and then they're like, oh, it's not called that anymore. I'm not going to call it whatever it is now. But still, technology moves so fast that even modern digital filmmaking cannot keep up with it. So it's best to avoid what's happening in that moment. Politics, agreed. But here we go. Wave of mortar sweeping the eastern seaboard. Again, Dave Hinkle in the comments, old Pennsylvania. It seems like this is isolated to a kind of the East Coast.
It's a very isolated. I found out recently that like 2/3 of the country lives in the Eastern time zone,
Go.
and that's why most things are scheduled in America to the Eastern time zone. The Pacific time zone has, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. That's about it. And then the Central has Chicago and I think a couple of Texas cities. The East Coast is all kinds of very, not just New York, Boston, DC, Atlanta, like all kinds of huge cities.
Yeah.
And so if something is contained to the Eastern Seaboard,
There you go.
it's still a lot of people.
I have only lived in California, so it's not my problem yet, is what I'm hearing. So, which is part of what these characters are going through. Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Oh, I will say, yeah, earlier they did say eating the bodies was a big thing. And then we saw outside the lurching zombies. A, there was a naked one, so nudity really up the rating on this. And then B, eating even just bugs off trees and things. We've started to see a gradual increase in the, not gore, but horrific elements through a drip feed. Whereas the first zombie that chases Barbara and kills her brother is just a grayish looking guy in makeup that's lumbering towards them. And then we see Ben shoot several, and then we get to nude ones outside eating bugs and things. And now the news coverage starts to say they're eating corpses of the recently dead.
So we have that truck. If we can get some gas, we can get out of
But
here.
yeah, this is the other plot point that creates a rift is, do we stay where we're at safe, or do we try and make it to a potentially more safe, which again, you see in a lot of horror movies and specifically zombie movies.
It's funny you brought up the nudity. The in the commentary track, Marilyn Eastman, who is one of the actresses, not she's not Barbara Judy, but she was around. She was like one of the assistants to the producers. Every time the new person shows up, she goes, "Oh, there's the new model," and it was like it was this weird like tick that she had.
Okay.
And then whenever the nude model wasn't there, she'd be like, "Is the nude girl in the scene?" No, she's not in the scene. And I was like, "Why are you so obsessed with this nude stuff?" It was really weird, and I couldn't help but like notice that she was noticing over and
right.
over again.
Maybe because it establishing for film at the time did not just casually throw in nudity, so it's making them very modern. I will also say the budget starts to show here where they cut to Washington, D.C., and they're like, oh, this general and scientist just left a meeting with the president. They're just walking on the street, and we're asking them questions, and the general is denying. And let's listen.
Oh yeah, this is the actual
Cause. He's saying, I can't, no comment. And yet, scientists.
Everything is being done that can be done.
Traditional government deny.
There is a definite connection between
Yet, hold on. Scientists saying Venus probe that returned and had undetectable radiation, so they detonated it in orbit or in the atmosphere, so it didn't bring the radiation back to Earth. And yet, so a big sci-fi element that I always forget in the zombie lore, but also B, these scientists saying, "Oh yeah, I think there's definitely a connection. Our bad. We're representing the government, and there's a link between these." I'm like, no government, even in 1968, is going to admit any culpability.
Actually argue though that their production value was increased by the fact that they literally went to Washington D.C.
Well, I saw the Capitol
and, like,
building.
That's the real Capitol building.
Yeah.
Like people wouldn't be able to do that anymore. But they were just like, I mean, they're not that far. They from Washington. They just drove down there one early morning apparently and started filming. And they had parked illegally.
I was going to say, did they even pull a permit? I could go get that shot right now with my cell phone.
Well, yes, that's true.
And a general's
as soon as
costume.
you start filming it, you get tackled by, some FBI agent who's worried about you scouting your terrorist attack. They actually had a national parks police officer or security or whatever it is in that agency come over to them and told them they had to move their car because if he lets one general park there, the rest of the generals are going to start asking if they can park there, and so he can't let anybody. He apparently was legitimately fooled by their general costume
Nice.
that they had on that day. But they filmed that whole thing in like a couple of hours,
Right.
which is pretty quick. And like you were saying earlier about shrinking cameras and making them much more portable and stuff, that would have been a very difficult shoot to do even a few years before that. And like you said, yeah, nowadays you can film it on your cell phone, but you get in trouble. They found like there's a little window of time where they can film it without getting arrested.
No, and agreed that what they did was good. Guerrilla filmmaking, before that was a term, and it probably comes from their commercial background. But like I said, the government viewpoint, I think, I don't know if it's one that reads now, but them confirming anything. And then B, like I said, sci-fi element of, hey, a probe from Venus with radiation that we detonated before it came back to Earth. So that's something that, when I mentioned, they didn't talk about an outbreak or being a virus like we associate with modern zombie. But the origin of modern zombie ethos is saying, no, it's actually from space radiation from Venus, which is, again, so 1950 schlock of an explanation. And like I said, you pointed out earlier, it wasn't the bite, it's it is the radiation. But again, looking back, I think they retconned that a bit. And in again, all the Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and the remakes, they've gone viral and said it's a bite and a virus or a disease that they spread. So
Yeah, the way mythology evolves is sort of a fascinating process as different people work on the story and contribute what they, want to keep the things that they like and sort of discard the things that they don't. I don't think the Venus probe gets mentioned in any other iteration. Um, but adding the virus sort of nature of it, and later on we get the fast zombies with 28 Days Later in the Dawn of the Dead remake, and then there's sort of like culturally there's like a push and pull because the Walking Dead decides, oh no, we like the virus, but we want them to be slow, and it's this sort of long-term cultural conversation that isn't ever really settled, I don't
no,
think.
even Land of the Dead, George Romero did in the '90s, maybe 2000s, but again, furthered the Day of the Dead's like, can they learn? Can they do tasks and things? And I think there was a king zombie roaming the wastelands, organizing them, who had clearly higher brain function and was targeting the last city of humans that had, isolated itself. We see a character zombie that is organizing, and that was part of again George Romero's, you know, canon that he added. He died in 2017, and I think was still working on it on another one. But even that, and a lot of this they did say was based on the book I Am Legend, which we've had movies of since then, or Omega Man and I Am Legend, and even that, the Will Smith I Am Legend, toyed with that as well. Of like, hey, they're clearly thinking and organizing their own subcultures and relationships. And again, then that introduced the whole, maybe there is a monster, maybe it's us, William Golding like level of, hey, are they just different than us? They've got their own society. Is it they're the next evolution and moving on? This doesn't toy with any of that. The zombies are clearly a mindless, unnatural horde, abomination, still in like the classic horror sense.
Yeah, which is how I prefer myself. I don't want to identify with the zombies.
Exactly. Well, I think we're far enough in. I mentioned the racial tensions, the politics, and the generational divide. But there have been decades of film theorists assigning what the zombies mean outside. Again, I said, why haven't the word communist come up? But many have said, after the fact, in their film classes and things, hey, they actually represent communism. Outside, there's a communal collective unit of unthinking masses that are all working together and trying to destroy this multicultural, multi-family, different dynamic way of life on the inside that represents America. So, what are your thoughts? The zombies, communists?
Well, I feel like at a certain point where you're trying to, if you try to decide that everything in a movie is a code to be deciphered, I feel like you start to miss the experience of watching the movie. Like, not everything has to represent something. But also, I feel like the Vietnam metaphor doesn't work very well. It reminds me of, again, one of the other video essays here on the channel. You should watch them. Is the debunking the Sixth Sense video, where if you're not very familiar with the film, or if you haven't seen it in a long time, I can present you evidence that Bruce Willis is not dead by selectively showing you certain clips and not mentioning other things. So with the Vietnam thing, you could be like, yeah, they were a mindless horde, and there's a helicopter and
I
stuff like that. But like when you sit and watch the movie, no point does it feel like a Vietnam movie in the way that Aliens is obviously Vietnam. The way the soldiers behave, the way the lieutenant is kind of a dickhead, and they're sent in with lots of guns, and they think they're fine, but they're actually going to be outmatched by an
native.
enemy that has no qualms about hiding in the dark, and like Aliens is about Vietnam, and it very clearly is so, including the aesthetics of it, the way that they're dressed and stuff. It feels like Vietnam if you even have a passing understanding of Vietnam. the only way mentally that feels like Vietnam is if somebody tells you it feels like Vietnam and you start looking for clues.
Right.
And it becomes a spot the reference game instead of watching the movie and letting it sort of affect you. And I feel like it's a misuse of everyone's time.
Okay. And yet here we are. You're like, you should just watch the movie and not look for theories. We're literally talking over the film right now, explaining theories. People would be better served muting us.
But there's a difference between looking deeper into the film and looking for codes.
Okay.
So like all of the racial stuff that you're talking about, I do feel like are legitimately layers that existed that are part of the film inherently. You don't have to it's not to say that one thing represents another. Like it would be like if you're watching Predator and saying that the Predator represents black people because he has dreadlocks and he just wants and you should let black criminals get away with it or something. I don't know. I don't
All
know
right,
what
you're gonna get in a lot of trouble for this. I will point out also they're napalming the zombies right now.
That's not
Dropping napalm.
This is where this is actually a great example of the selective
I'm
interpretation.
selecting one.
Because Molotov cocktails are named after a Russian communist named
Communists.
Molotov.
Exactly.
Who used them to overthrow the government. The people that are communists in this situation are the people throwing Molotov cocktails. So you can't say that the victims of the Molotov cocktails are the communists. It doesn't even make any sense. And it's also, that's not behavior like napalm. Napalm sticks to you. That's the horrific thing about napalm,
Right.
is that it keeps burning
It's
even
American.
when you try and douse it.
Engineering.
This was just a fire.
There's
Nothing
fire
like
in the
napalm.
movie.
It's nothing like
You're
Vietnam.
telling me that's not Vietnam? There's fire.
That's what I'm saying. You're taking it's such a tenuous connection that I don't believe that it fits at all. And like if you were to say these are communists and this is Vietnam, what two guys running up to the truck and a girl following them and the truck exploding. What does that represent? What does that mean? Is that Tet offensive? Like, why is the girl there? Like,
Tet offensive was after
as
this was released.
Ho Chi Minh City? This fits Vietnam in the slightest.
My understanding of Ho Chi Minh City, yes, this is the last helicopter out. And again, I believe that happened a year after this movie came out. So they were prescient in predicting these coming. Latent precog filmmakers.
Going back to like the actual exact time of when all this stuff was happening, and this is another thing towards them understanding the sort of racial dynamics that happened in the film. The assassination of Martin Luther King happened. They were driving to New York with the film print to show to distributors when they heard on the radio that MLK had been assassinated. So obviously the ending can't possibly be a reference to MLK, but they did put that together in their own. They're like, oh, people are totally gonna this because the movie was done, and the movie was going to come out, not much later. I mean, in their minds, they didn't know which distributor would pick it up and how long it would take or whatever. But like, they were aware, oh, this is gonna color people's perception of it. But they didn't
Color people's perception. Puns. Racial puns. I will also say, this part with the incompetent young guy spraying the gas around as he was. I understand they didn't have as many safeties on gas pumps there, but this going sideways in a slapstick way also always strikes me as, you're really that bad at this? For the young white guy, who again is in Vietnam, where most of the black guy is doing all the fighting.
But again, like if you say that the black guy represents poor African Americans who are drafted and they don't have any other options, the way that a white guy can get out of it by going to college or whatever. Ben is telling off Harry constantly, and he's ordering Tom around constantly. None of that fits your metaphor. Like if Tom represents the superior, the Kennedy or the Johnson administration, like that doesn't line up with men saying, "No, fuck you, I'm in charge." I shouldn't be swearing because I'm gonna get
True,
very
being in charge.
demonetized. But um, the like it doesn't line up the way that you want it to. If you take certain elements, you can say this matches, but there's a lot of elements that don't. In the way that the racial tensions, I don't think there's anything that doesn't line up. There's nothing where they say no, this doesn't apply. It clearly applies almost every time. So I think that's a perfectly valid way of looking at it. Vietnam stuff is just somebody trying to fill, pages in a column because, they have to write an article every week for the
Or
Village Voice.
present to their film theory class and have a
Yes,
term paper
that.
due. Oh, here's an important part. He's locked out. The older generation. Cooper's not letting him in. Dick move. And now it's less safe because he had to break the door in. Will he stay? Will he go? Finally, helping himself.
Yeah, and it's so to me, when you start looking for the coded messages and stuff like that and the different alternate interpretations, I think you missed the human drama of this guy at first, abandoning someone who was trying to save his family, and then realizing how wrong he was and going to help. And then Ben,
I will say maybe he realized, oh wait, if that door's open, my cellar is even more compromised. I better gamble on securing the door. Whether Ben makes it or not, it's probably not forefront of his mind.
well, yeah, I mean, I think that could be true. And I think honestly, this is a case where I think both interpretations are valid. But also the character of Ben, but like that conflict, honestly, is the human drama that I'm talking about. What is actually going through his head? And then Ben, who controls himself for the time that it takes to hammer the door securely, then loses it and beats up the old guy or the middle-aged guy, I guess. Like that emotional roller coaster that Ben is on is quite a journey too. And if you're focused on he represent, this is the Watts riot or something, like you lose like that this is a character who is a human being that is in a tough situation. And
Yeah.
that's where I object to looking for allegories where there aren't any.
Cool. No, and
So
again,
that's
having a character who exists in a real world with things like racial tension that could color their reactions versus it being representative, the actions being represented. I will say again, I mentioned how progressively we up the gore. Here we're getting the gnawing on intestines, pulling bones level of zombie flesh eating. Again, the original name, flesh eaters. I also wonder, are they like, oh, for finally a hot meal because the car blew up. But we see gradually more and more gore climbing in the movie.
Although there is that skull at the beginning that I always forget. Because I turned this on, I was going to be, in preparation for this episode, I turned it on and I was going to watch it with my daughter. And then I saw the skull and I was like, oh, never mind. I mean,
the body upstairs when they're first clearing the house.
Yeah, the one at the top of the stairs. Because it's pretty gross right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then but like that is like a peak and then it drops off. And then, like you say, it does build up slowly again. But that one I always forget about. I think because I get the sense of what you're talking about, of like the gradually increasing gore. I always forget about that head at the top of the stairs, or it's the whole body. Like,
yeah,
the head is sort of mutilated. Yeah, but it's and they again on a production level, they didn't have a lot of money, and they made. I mean, I think for the most part, a lot of the gore and a lot of the effects, and some of it is covered up by black and white for sure. But like it works. Like that doesn't look like a fake rubber hand.
Right. I will say
some of it is there was actual like meat in there that the
yeah,
actors could eat.
I would say that last scene varies wildly between them pulling out, actual chicken livers or a bone, from a turkey leg that you're like, okay, I can see that. And then there's one shot of a hand, and it's a woman's hand, and then there's just kind of squiggled gel on it. And I'm like, there's a whole woman just standing off screen then that she's lending her hand to. All right, and then Nathan Harold commented saying, this is a great B movie with an A movie ending. So we are getting towards the end, and I, again, spoiled a lot of things, but I think that the ending is still resonant and agreed that it's a great one coming up.
Well, one of us could try to get to the car.
We're still 20 minutes from the end.
All right. I think
So,
we do get a lot of character development now where she's still calling back Johnny saying he's got the keys. The truck blew up. There's a secondary car we can try to get to.
yeah, and it's again, I think this is her performance and the writing around it works really well because she's somebody who doesn't, because her character isn't thinking straight, and she conveys that, and the other characters putting it together. There's a bad version of that where they solve the puzzle and whatever, and it's like decoding something where the crazy person is speaking backwards or whatever. Like she actually sounds like she's traumatized. They actually start off by ignoring her and then realize she is talking about a real thing, and it feels very natural the way that conversation evolves to get to essentially the plot point of, like you said, there's another car. But they don't make it feel like the writers and the directors and everybody involved, it doesn't feel like they're trying to get to the exposition. It feels like these are characters in a traumatic situation and also exposition came out of it. And that's not easy to do. And that's one of the sort of better things about this movie.
Yep. I think we now are starting to see law enforcement dealing with the menace. And again,
one thing that threw me off, because I hadn't seen it in a long time, is it's very clearly daytime.
well, I was going to say, that reads like, hey, look how manageable this is. A group of 30 armed militia folks, guys that just come out to help the sheriff. Oh, kill the brain, you kill the ghoul. Just established, again, a very classic line. But showing this Southern sheriff, and again, Southern, I realize they're in Pennsylvania, but the Mason-Dixon line was literally the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania. So they're probably just south of that. And the fact that they're just like, hey, let's just round up 30 guys and we're going to clear these things out. It's just a hassle. And again, you point out it's during daytime. Back then, they would have shot this segment on film in the field, taken it back, developed it, and then put it on the nightly news. And so there's a 5-hour gap. And in my mind, I'm like, that sheriff's dead. Like, first watching this, I'm like, these guys are saying, oh, look how easy it is 6 hours ago. And then I was waiting for, them to exit the farmhouse and find all their bodies overrun by 100, But this newscast makes it sound very manageable.
Yeah, it does feel like they're not setting up a sequel in this. It seems like they're done, like after this one night. A lot of the time sort of frame of stuff doesn't really make sense because if this was happening in the early afternoon, like it seems like it is, then like that would mean the afternoon before Barbara went to the cemetery, and that doesn't really make sense. And they're watching this on television in the middle of the night. So even if it took until the 6 o'clock news to broadcast it, they give the impression that this is all live. So it doesn't, none of this, the timing of the lighting of it really makes a lot of sense. The only way it actually would have worked to me, is if the movie was not set in Pennsylvania, if it was set in California, you could have had on the East Coast guys, in the morning going around hunting and they can just say on California, oh, look, it gets better in the morning 3 hours ago in Georgia or Pennsylvania. We just have to wait for the sun to rise in California and we'll be okay.
Well,
and then you have a ticking clock.
I will say
ultimately, what happened was they just couldn't film all of those people at night and didn't have enough lights.
Again, I was going to point to the sheriff saying, we're going to wrap this up in 24 hours. More of my Vietnam evidence of going into a conflict and saying, it's all going fine. On the news broadcast, the official statement is, we've got this in the bag. Don't worry. B.
Within the context of the film, he's correct. Like, if you ignore the sequels at the time in 1968, he's right.
I still feel like it could apply not Vietnam, but messaging to the American people of, hey, let's just give a rosier picture than maybe they're seeing. B, we're seeing a lot of zombies using tools here. We talked about the car earlier. There were shots of them taking out the headlights in the truck, but I was like, oh, at least they had them cover their eyes. Like these, it's light, it hurts like fire. But in this case, they're like, no, let's all pick up rocks. Very 2001 Space Odyssey Monkeys moment of, wait a minute, we could get inside if we all work together. And again, then we get the inside, things are starting to come out, fall apart. The gun's dropped. Who's he going to go for? We had a line where he told his wife, I have to get that gun away from Ben.
You want to stay up here now? Helen, get
Yeah, poor Helen being abused twice. And then it all just sort of goes sideways at once.
I will say that, yes, it all kind of falls apart pretty quickly here.
You sort of wonder, like, is there another farmhouse that doesn't have a Tom or a Harry?
Right,
And they
he's
all
the
just
real
get
problem.
along and they wait patiently until the posse comes and rescues
Yep.
them.
So
That
now
was just a really boring movie.
we did have Nathan asking, we watched Crazies after this again, the much more modern 2010 horror film. A lot of farm implements.
The original Crazies or the
Oh,
remake with Timothy?
there, yes, sorry, the original is probably what he's asking for. But Tom's going down, or Mr. Cooper, been shot by Ben for his crimes, just trying to make it to the basement to look after his daughter.
Yeah, he's such a jerk over the course of the film that you don't even have a sense of him feeling for his daughter, and so this scene feels unearned.
I agree. I would say it's like the Walter White Breaking Bad of I was doing this for my family justification is what I read it as, because I also don't believe that he has the paternal love that would indicate. But oh, there's our original coming to get you, Barbara Zombie.
Yeah, poor Barbara. And again, like she's appears to be the main character for the first 7 or 8 minutes, and then she's just sort of catatonic, and then this happens. And it's like,
I will say
she
everything
doesn't have,
goes
like,
sideways. She did save the mom here,
yeah.
Helen, who only finds that her daughter has turned. And again, I know you said the bite doesn't do it. We talked about it's the radiation, but I forget if we saw the bite on her arm. Like, I don't know what fatal injury she had that would have caused her to die. And again, using tools, she did just recently die, but she's just straight up murdering. She's not even like mindless hoarding it. She's going stabby, stabby.
Yeah, and this is a little less effective than some of the other things.
And again, applying if it's not even Vietnam, you've got the older generation worrying about the African Americans going to shoot them, which he did, but it's their own kids they should be worried about. Patty Hearst was probably, again, a year or so after this movie, but still, brainwashed, rich, disaffected white kids are the real zombie, Matt, is what I'm saying. We're finally learning the truth in the end of the movie.
To me, a lot of this feels like it's just, and I shouldn't say just, because I don't mean this as a limiting thing.
Johnny!
I mean, it feels like, what is the worst? Yeah.
The gloves!
It's-
Every time we see this, I think, grab the car keys. Get the keys from his pocket, Ben. Just real quick, get the keys. But
It doesn't seem like they're set up for that, because he says he has the keys and then he shows up. It seems like they're planning on that, and then it just doesn't happen. It's strange that the keys don't come back.
Right, and he's reaching into the hoard, so maybe he's trying to protect her. Maybe he had the thought of those keys. But there's our original zombie friend. He seems completely screwed here, by the way. And then you got the...
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you really want to like read into things too much and incorrectly, he's got this horde coming in the house. He goes into the basement, locks the door, and survives the night. So Tom was right the whole time. So really, the lesson here is that the black guy's going to listen to the white guy.
I'm
if
just
you
saying.
Want to read the movie incorrectly?
So the movie's racist. Yes, I agree that he's falling into the basement, and again, it is that they could have discussed this whole thing strategically and both been right of, okay, let's stay up here. The basement is the Alamo, and we're just fall back. It's the last resort. but we shouldn't start in there. Compromise, people. Can't we all just get along? But now they all are just pouring in, milling about. Zombie party.
Apparently, boarding up the basement worked perfectly fine. But sorry, what I was saying earlier though about like the mom getting killed by the kid and the Barbara getting killed by her brother, it seems like at this point it's the end of the movie and they're just sort of thinking, what is the worst thing that can happen to these characters? And like the thing that they've been thinking about the whole time turns out to like the thing they've been worried about the whole time is the thing that ends up killing them. And like that's really what it feels like to me, is that it doesn't feel like it represents anything. It just feels like everything going wrong. And it's not, and it's about the scariest, worst thing. And for Ben, ultimately, it's, and spoiling, one of the most famous endings, is what happens to him is he's been prepared and he's been level-headed mostly for most of the film, and yet he gets mistaken for a zombie. And he doesn't, despite all of his hard work and his preparation, he's the one, he doesn't make it through the night any more than anybody, or I guess he does more, but slightly more.
He's got
than
several
everybody.
hours. I will say, yeah. Spoilers for 6 minutes from now. But I will say, again, everything went pear-shaped. He's fallen back. At this point, he did put a lot of bullets in those two, and I'm like, is that your last bullet? He's going to get upstairs and be like, dang, I should not have. I should have just smashed in their head with this sawhorse. But I'm still glad that it keeps going, and I do think more modern zombie movies and sequels to this do keep that going. Where, oh no, clearly he's going to die with the rest of them. It's like, oh no, he can fall back. He might still survive this. And there's always that hope for at least an individual, and if there is a breakdown in society and family groups and things like that, you're like, well, at least a rugged individual can survive. This is America. And then we just transition to daytime.
So it's not about individualism at all, because the people that like solve the problem is like a group of people that work together.
Well, and then betray each other and cause more problems by locking each other out. And
No, I'm saying the party. Like they kill all the zombies by working together and by communicating and
with superior air support like Vietnam.
It's nothing like it's a news television helicopter. It is nothing like Vietnam. Like you can find some. Vietnam had helicopters. That's all that is.
They had helicopters and lit things on fire. I will say though that this part, again, the initial I mentioned, they just transitioned to daytime. I think as much as that fast forwards, it does lend a question inside us, like, wait, what's going on with Ben? Did he make it? We clearly lost time with the character. Is he still alive in there or not? And so that question is pregnant during all these shots. And again, I'm surprised. Well, when I first saw this, and even on rewatch, I'm like, all right, I guess this group of yokels really was cleaning up zombies and said, we'll have this wrapped up in 24 hours.
4 or 5 men and a couple dogs. There's a house over
And we
there
did.
behind
And
Yeah,
again,
this is a much more like positive adventure film if we followed the guy in the house.
Yeah. And then again, similar to Mr. Cooper being right about the basement, you're like, okay, well, he said we'll wrap all this up in 24 hours. And I'm like, okay. I mean, again, the sequels prove that maybe they did not. But in this pocket of Pennsylvania, they at least held out for another day. But I will also say, again, German shepherds, southern white men with guns roving through a field and saying, oh boy, the cavalry's coming to help Ben. The racial element in casting African American is introducing for me, watching, going, oh wait, there's some tension here of, is it really help coming on the way? Or again, saying, oh, the cavalry's arrived. Like Birth of a Nation has a very famous scene of the cavalry coming and it not being the cavalry that you would want as a Black American.
The cavalry, like in that scene, is a white woman being in danger from a Black man. So like that's not what's happening here. So,
I agree. I'm not applying it so much as I'm saying with the elements of the time, saying, hey, this group of guys coming to help, do I really think this is going to turn out great for my main character? Even the first time I watched this. And in the back of my mind, I was like, no. I know, again, we said B movie with a movie ending, but I think with a jaded interpretation, I had pegged the surprise ending coming, which we've spoiled now several times in several different ways. I don't know why I'm being cagey about it.
One of the most famous endings.
All right.
Everybody
These guys, again, pretty efficient about this. They're just going about clockwork, cleaning up. It's like a infestation. They're like, let's go out, get this managed, be home by lunchtime.
Yeah, that's one of the more unrealistic things because headshots aren't easy. And
We saw several of, it takes 5 or 6 of them shooting at the same time for one of them to hit the head.
No, I said headshot, but no modern politics. So yeah, I hope that doesn't age.
I think, again, the part where I said, is this Vietnam? Is this different, hippies and things like that? It's, you have once told me a quote of, just because something has applicability doesn't mean it's an analogy. It could apply of the social breakdowns. Oh no!
Yeah. It's such a downer.
So, A, saying he's dead, let's go get him. There's another one. They cut to newsprint level stills. And again, I know there's a question of, hey, a group of southern white guys with guns coming to save people, seeing a threat. Is it a zombie? Is it a black man with a gun? And then cutting to newsprint style stills of them removing his body with baling hooks to go burn it. Does feel like an intentional choice of, I know, again, MLK assassination, but, lynchings from earlier in the century when this would have come out would have had similar historical footage showing, again, not in the 60s, but, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, pictures like that would have appeared in the newspaper. So I think that part of, I feel like it's intentional with even with the casting being just the best actor. A lot of the racial tension that we've described came about because of that choice in the editing. I do feel like this one is leaning directly into that of the way to show this ending.
But the issue with that is that these guys weren't trying to, like, in the diegesis of the film, these guys weren't trying to kill him. They mistook him for a zombie. So even if zombies are hippies and we're trying to clear society of hippies, they were incorrect about him not trying to get him the way, like, I don't think lynch mobs inadvertently killed, like, they're specifically trying to commit a horrible crime against their victims, whereas these guys, it was an accident.
I think anytime you get a mob together, they don't have a great plan. They're going to go out and things that happen, maybe not accidents.
Except in the movie, they do have a great
right.
plan.
They
are killing zombies and they're clearing them out and they're doing a good job. So it's hard to, it honestly feel, it could accidentally be misinterpreted as what you're saying is those lynch mobs didn't do anything wrong. Because they generally they got the right guy, and maybe once in a while they accidentally got the wrong guy. It's a bad way of looking at it. Whereas in Night of the Living Dead, they mostly did the right thing. They accidentally killed the wrong guy, and that's tragic. I don't think lynch mobs, under any circumstance, were doing the right thing. And
okay, I wanted to make sure you were ending that in the right way, but. You're like, yes, lynch mobs make mistakes, but think of all the good things they do.
Specifically because lynch mobs are bad, and these guys were generally good and made a mistake. That's why I feel like it's different. Right.
I do think, again, for what they could represent, adding tension to the film with the way they're depicted, and again, not taking a moment to say, oh, there's one in the window, not questioning it. Makes it so that there is did they see a zombie? Did they just see a threat? Are they shooting anything that moves? So I will agree that it is open to interpretation. I don't think that's what you said at all. You're like, it's clearly they mistook him for a zombie. Case closed.
Well, okay, so this is the like sort of main difference between like your sort of perspective and mine is that like we disagree about whether, you know, who's wrong, but we both agree that I'm right. So that's
Mine
like
was
I
that
think
we
the
could both
takeaway.
be right, so I'm at least half right by you
But the
being.
takeaway is we both know I'm correct.
I think that my hot takes, where I researched none of them, I will concede, yeah, anything's possible, even the idea that you could be right. But that's the end of the film. Thank you, everyone, for
But
joining us.
I think all of this discussion happens because Night of the Living Dead is a really good movie.
Right.
And so I'm glad to have I haven't watched it in a really long time. It actually took me back to the first time I saw it was in high school. And so like I had like fond memories of watching it on Halloween. So like almost exactly I don't say exactly how many years, but almost to the day, watching it with my high school friends, you know, on a Halloween night. It was it's so there's you know personal connection to this movie as well as just being a quality movie.
No,
So
and
I'm glad we got together for this one.
I think one of the reasons
And
it
hopefully we can.
persists for 50 years is that it allows interpretations. It allows the discussion, and not even saying the filmmaker coming out and saying no, that specific one is the right answer. You know, that would be of it probably have shortened. I understand the copyright-free, you know, mix-up allowed it to spread, but so does the discussion about what it could mean and represent to different people. It is a bit of a Rorschach test and allows it to reflect back on the viewer, which a lot of great art is, and that's why it resonates with audiences to this day.
I think that's true. So I think that's a good place to wrap it up there. Thank you to everyone who is watching or who watches it later. Go ahead and leave a comment or hopefully a like. Subscribe. We're going to do this again probably next month. We don't know exactly which film it is going to be yet, so I don't want to spoil that. But it will be a public domain movie that you can freely watch whenever you want, on any platform probably. So thank you guys for watching.
All right, thanks.